Hi folks, welcome. We're doing the book tour event for Unbelonging by Gayatri Sethi. My name is Esme, I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective, and I'm joined tonight by Gayatri, the author of Unbelonging, as well as Anjali Enjeti, who is also a phenomenal author. And we are so lucky to have them both in a room, so to speak, together to talk about Unbelonging. So thank you so much everyone for being here. I also want to extend a super warm welcome to Dr. Dotson and the students of Clayton State University, who will be joining us tonight. And as I understand it, we'll be discussing Unbelonging in their class, which is really, really neat. For those who are joining a Firestorm event for the first time, we are a 13-year-old bookstore cooperative. We are located in the Southeast on occupied Cherokee land in so-called Asheville, North Carolina. We're a general interest bookstore, but we are known for our selection of titles around feminism, queerness, social movements, and radical politics. And our whole catalog is on our website. So if you haven't picked up a copy of Unbelonging yet for whatever reason and you would like to, as you should, we will drop a link to order that in the chat. This is such a special event for me because I have known Gayatri for so many years, and I remember hearing about when this book was first starting to come together, and honestly before that, having conversations around identity and belonging that had a huge impact on me, and I'm just thrilled to see how those wisdoms and reflections have come together in this beautiful book. So before we move into the conversation piece and I step off camera, I want to introduce Gayatri and Anjali a little further. Gayatri Sethi is an educator, writer, and independent consultant based in Atlanta. Born in Tanzania and raised in Botswana, she is of South Asian Punjabi descent, multilingual, and polycultural. She reflects on these lifelong experiences of identity, immigration, and belonging in her debut book, Unbelonging. She teaches and writes about social justice, global studies, and comparative education. And when she's not homeschooling or recommending readings as Desi Book Aunty, she travels the globe with her students and family. I highly recommend following her Instagram, Desi Book Aunty, for some amazing book recommendations. Of course, we are also joined by Anjali Enjeti. Anjali is a former attorney and award-winning journalist based near Atlanta. She is the author of the essay collection Southbound and the novel The Parted Earth. Her writing about politics, social justice, and books has appeared in Harper's Bazaar, The Washington Post, The Nation, and elsewhere. We actually did another event with both Gayatri and Anjali several months ago to celebrate Anjali's book release. I will drop a link to that in the recording in the chat as well. That was another really fabulous conversation, and we're so lucky to have them both back. This event tonight will go until about 8:30, and we will be taking audience questions. So if you are attending through Zoom, you can submit your questions using the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen throughout the discussion. And then around 8 p.m., we're going to transition into answering your questions. And this event will be recorded, so you can rewatch it later or send it to a friend. So with all of that out of the way, Gayatri, Anjali, once again, thank you so much for being here virtually with us. And I'm so excited to hear more about the process behind Unbelonging.
Esme, thank you so much. My apologies to everyone that I wasn't muted earlier, but that's a good way to remind you to do what I just did. So this is being live streamed on Firestorm's Facebook page. And so if you're on Facebook and you feel comfortable doing so, please consider going to their page and sharing it to your own Facebook profile. That's what I was doing. That was causing so much noise when I thought I was muted. I am so incredibly excited and honored and joyous to be in this conversation with my dear friend Gayatri. She is a friend, a sister, a colleague, a comrade in every sense of the word. And I've just learned so much from her about everything, not just writing, not just reading, but just about ways to move through life. And so I've been looking forward to this event for quite a long time now, and have, this is one of two copies that I have of the book. I've got a lot of questions here, and as Esme mentioned, we'll start taking your questions around 8, but I wanted to start out, I thought this was a really important book to have Gayatri read from. It's really unique in its form, in its structure. It's extremely unique visually. I love just holding this book. So I thought it would be best if we start out hearing a wonderful excerpt, and then I'll go into some of our questions.
Thank you so much, Esme and Anjali. I feel so much love and appreciation for both of you. Thank you, Firestorm Books, for hosting this. Thank you to every one of you who's here, and I'm going to mention some of you by name a little bit later on. I want to start, as I do sometimes when I remember, by acknowledging that I am, currently speaking to you from the sacred lands of the Muskogee Creek peoples, and their ongoing work for their sovereignty and liberation is something that I have deep appreciation and empathy and respect for. And I talk about that in this book, and how I was 40-some years old when I first learned to offer a land acknowledgement, and it's only the beginning. There's so much more to say and do, especially actions. So I want to begin with that. And I want to read you an excerpt that is about identity. In your essay collection, at the beginning, you have a section that says, Anjali, what are you, right? And you have an essay about what are you. And when I read that, I chuckled, because it would be in conversation with some of the segments that I'm about to read. So this is a nod to you, dear friend, thinker, talented writer, member of the writing community, someone who deeply inspires me. So you could start this with, what are you, or who am I? Who am I? I'm a hyphenated human. I'm adept at adapting wherever I go. I'm a polyglot, malleable. I speak many tongues. I have numerous personas. Survival. I make myself at home, but I'm not sure where I belong. Some days, my hyphens and parentheses erase me. For all this, I'm judged. I'm judged harshly for being inauthentic, fake, condescending, too much this, not enough that. Do you judge me because you don't understand me? Identity. Who am I? All I know is you don't decide who I am. I do. And then I have a struggle song. Where do I belong? Where on earth do I belong? And then I offer a verse, so semi-verse, kind of narrative poetry, reflection style. Unbox me. This is also an answer to the question, who am I? Unbox me. We are expected to check boxes. But who lives in boxes? This or that, here or there, pick one box, check it. I'm other. I'm also all of the above. Am I everything? A wise poet, oft quoted, says, I contain multitudes. Truer words I never heard said about myself. We cannot be contained in boxes or closets or binaries. Humans are fluid. I flow in the gaps. I live in the intersections. I live in the margins. I even inhabit the margins of the intersections. I cannot be divided or carved up into sections. I cannot check a box. I would be split on the atomic level, and then everything else, like the box, would explode.
So before I ask the first question, I just want to tell you that not only is that passage so lovely, those passages so lovely, but in particular, what I found to be so timely about your use of the word box was that we had a major census this year. And your book is coming out when it was imperative for us to fill out these census forms and to choose what boxes we live in, which is a very difficult thing for a lot of us to do. And as you know, I'm mixed race and mixed ethnicity. And so when I read that passage, that was the first thing I thought about, was that I had just very recently, you know, in the past year, struggled with the census yet again. It didn't even get easier for me this year as it was 10 years ago. So I really, really appreciate that passage is in this book, and you know what it means for so many of us who are really haunted actually by a lot of these boxes that are on so-called official documents. So I want to go into my first question. Obviously, Unbelonging is such an important book about identity, but multiple identities, evolving identities, diasporic identities, but also unknown identities, not knowing who you are or where you come from. So given that, I'd love to know a little bit about the origin story of this book and how you came to decide how to write about identity.
Yeah, I'm going to try to give us kind of a glimpse into that because it's such an encompassing question. You know, it was an exploratory process and an experimental process, right? I knew that it had to be about identity and belonging. I knew that because if one were to really think about what I might most have to say, right? So when we approach a writing project, we're like, well, what am I trying to say? Well, you know, memoirs that I read would be very narcissistic in the sense of just being so navel gazing. A lot of memoirs actually tend not to be about people who share identities with us. I then looked at sort of academic texts, and I tried to find texts that would actually speak to these multiple identities, unknown identities, living in the margins of the intersections. And I was hard pressed to find content like that when I taught courses in global studies, for example, because one of the first core units you would do in an introductory global studies class or international studies class would be on identity. And I struggled to find the kind of work that I wanted to, the nuance, the layers, the questions. And so really I wrote this with the intention of trying to fill in that gap for myself, to have content to speak from, to teach from, that I had been seeking for a long time while I was still a college professor. So that was some of the origin story of it. The other thing is that when it comes to immigration, the general storyline is that you have a place of origin and then you have somewhere in the West, you know? So let's say, generally speaking, immigration literature has two-spaceness. Well, that's not the case for me. And so I struggled to also find the kind of nuanced, layered storytelling about what it means to be multiply immigrant from multiple places and unknown places, and places from which we were made refugees by colonial violence. And, you know, to be from places that were affected by imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, and then to be living in a white supremacist situation here in the sacred lands of the Muskogee. So all of those things, I struggled to find texts that would sort of encompass so many of the things that I have personally lived through and experienced, and often have to explain a lot. So between us friends in this Zoom room, you know, I almost created this because I have to tell these things over and over again to so many people. So I wanted them all in one place, be like, okay, just here is a gift, here's an offering in the form of a book. Please, maybe the answers are here. but maybe you'll leave with more questions than answers.
I love that. And so speaking of answers, one of the things I really appreciated about this book was that it provides a lot of tools to address and talk about identity that I didn't have before. And one of those tools is the suffix that you use, ish, I-S-H. Igloo, Sam, hat, just in case I'm not enunciating clearly. And I found this to be really valuable to sort of address the gaps that you just addressed in your last answer. And so I wanted to find out how you came to using this word ish and what its function is in the book.
Wow, thank you for asking that question. It came to me because, I was in extended negotiations, I'll put in negotiations very mildly, but really it was more violent than that, with folks from South Asia who, were born and raised on the continent, about my reclaiming the word Desi to self-identify. That term is fraught, and there are many scholars far more learned than I who could really speak to that. And I invite folks to read up and research if they're inclined. But the term Desi had to come with an ish for me, right? So, but then I'm also born and raised on the African continent. How would I convey that without conveying the single narrative about Africa as a singular space? It's a vast continent with, just multitudes of possibilities. And then it was the same with living here in the sacred lands. And so, it's kind of like for each of those identities, that whole unboxing led me to actually try to play with words and reclaim words like Desi, and then qualify the words to create new language. So I offer in this book a lot of invitations to research. I offer a lot of terms that you might see in your college textbooks as sort of like pointers and sort of like markers along the way, should you choose to use this text to learn and teach. But also what you'll find here is that because these topics are so complex, even within poetry and multiple languages that I speak, I could not find the word I was looking for. And so ish came to me. It's also kind of a play on words because ish also is a way to say something that means crap. So a lot of identity talk is crap. And yet identity matters, as I say over and over again in the book. So it was kind of a little bit of a play of words.
So I just want to, for people who don't yet have this book, I thought it was really important to show visually what parts of it look like. Just because what I feel really does so much service to this book is the form and the structure. And it's very fluid. I just want to show a few, and it's so artistic, actually. I just want to offer this because I think the way you chose to tell the story unspools the narrative in a way that is crucial to our ability to take it in. So there's another page. And let me just show one more, or just a few I wanted to show. Okay, here's a diagram. So now that folks who don't yet have the book have gotten a little preview of the design of the book, which is really so special and unique. I wanted to ask you how you came to this design. Obviously, you have quite an eye for how these words should be put on the page, and how you feel it works to help this narrative unspool and function.
Yeah, as I was saying, it needed to be layered, right? It needed to have many elements. And one of the ways you might look at this and take it apart would be to think of it as a tapestry. So this is a tapestry that looks like a book. But what if it were multidimensional and something we could hold and feel and sort of move around, which is why there's also space in here for the reader to do that with an invitation at the beginning to go ahead and bring your highlighters, bring your gold pens, bring your Post-its, just work with it. Just work with this book, make it your own, because this is an offering and it's also interactive. It's designed to be an interactive experience. Exactly. And so what came to me was that not only did I need to use words in multiple languages that I speak or learn, but also that I needed to convey that for folks like me who live in the margins and the hyphens, we are kind of like multidimensional in the kind of ways that the book is. So I wanted the reader to be able to experience that, if that makes sense. And it's not possible to experience multidimensionality in the form of a thing called a book that you flip, so could I do that? So again, with the tapestry, there were like research prompts, there were reflection questions, there were verses, there were elements of memoir, there were, other things. And so I then brought them together as if you would do a tapestry. Because if you think about it, you do have to bring those pieces together that seem like they don't fit until they all come together. And then you kind of give it a little border, and then you stitch it up, and then you look at it and you're like, oh, all of those different pieces make that. So that's kind of how I took tapestry work and translated it into book form. And until it came together, I was deeply concerned that it would be chaotic.
Now, this form, for people who don't know, you used to be an academic. Yeah. You have a PhD. The form of this book, how these words unspool, it's a mix of prose and poetry. I would consider this prose poetry. It must be very different looking than the kind of academic writing you did in your previous career. So what was the process in going from a very sort of traditional research heavy academic narrative to one like this, and what kind of unlearning was involved in that process?
A lot, because let's think about it. So I went through a very colonial education, most of us have, and I grew up on the African continent learning, British curricula. So that's an example of what I mean. There are many other ways you could kind of fill that out, but I talk about in the book also what it means to have a colonial education. I also am educated in the West, and the language that I most communicate in is the language of the colonizer. So I was taught to think like a colonizer, speak like a colonizer, and write like a colonizer. That's how I was taught. I was raised in it. That was the ecosystem within which I was educated, and I'm hyper-educated. And what I needed to do in this project was to unlearn a lot of that. For example, a lot of things we were taught about how to construct sentences, even on that level, I kind of questioned and interrogated here. Are we supposed to capitalize certain things? Like, well, who said we have to capitalize proper nouns? Especially if those were proper nouns that were given as a result of colonization. Like, who said that? So I really went on that micro level of interrogation and did some reworking on these pages. I gave myself permission to unlearn what I thought a good book meant. I gave myself permission to not write the way all of my college teachers and professors ever asked of me, or I asked of when I was still a teacher, right? I was holding students to a standard of what a paper looks like, because that's what I was taught to do. Well, this is not that kind of a book. This is the kind of book that challenges a lot of those norms and conventions, which, I kind of put in a few hints about many of those are rooted in colonial mindset. But hopefully the reader will conclude that themselves to say, if there's something here that makes no sense at all and really offends you, because that is the way that punctuation or grammar ought not to look, then this book will, kind of like discomfort you. And so there is a deliberate discomforting, which is what decolonizing your education sometimes looks and feels like. So there's intent behind that. I took a lot of what I had learned as academic theory, and I challenged myself to tell it as cleanly and simply and as humanly as possible, because it was, for me, academia was dehumanizing. And for me, a lot of those critical theories that I learned were words that obfuscated the truths of what it really means to be identified the way that I am. So I needed to be able to give myself permission to speak freely. And how do you do that? You kind of don't speak the way that you were taught to speak.
That makes so much sense. And I just wanted to show people an example. I was looking for examples while you were talking. So this passage is called My American Dream, but so people can see American, the word is not with the capital letter A. So can you tell me a little bit about that particular choice so that people have an example of what you're talking about when we talk about decolonizing writing?
I also go on, it's put within the context of a whole entire section in which I interrogate what that means, because US empire is a thing and we are a part of it. Everything unfolding in Afghanistan should be a reminder of that. And so I really wanted to challenge the reader to not think of identity the way that we are taught to think of identity, because very often we are taught to think of identity, and I say over and over again, identity matters, but I mean it in a very different way than the way that the conventional person speaks of identity. So one example is the flag wavingness. I am the type of person who cannot wave a single flag, and if flag waving and national boundaries and even passports are a function of colonialism's legacy, on this earth. So I am not one who can do that. So the capitalization of America would mean that I buy into the idea of America. I do not. There's an entire section of about 100 pages in which I interrogate various stories that we're told about America, because I'm living proof that that may not be so. So again, it's intended to discomfort and make us critique and think without me lecturing you about it. I just gave you a 5-minute, 3-minute blurb about that, as I would in the classroom. But what I'm hoping the reader does is ask themselves that and come to their own conclusion about why that choice.
And so this just reminds me, I should tell folks that you are also an authenticity editor. Yes. Sometimes known as a sensitivity editor. And Gayatri, full disclosure, has been I've been honored to have her as my authenticity editor. And what I appreciated about having you as my editor was that you were essentially also doing decolonizing work on my work by challenging me phrases and terms and how something is written. And so that, I thought that was just a very precious and unique experience for me. I had never had the pleasure of taking one of your classes, but I felt like I was essentially learning decolonization of writing by having the experience of working with you, which I loved. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about, you do social justice work. You are an activist. You do this not just in your writing. You broach very difficult conversations in multiple spaces, and that includes, for example, social media. And it puts you out there, and it makes you vulnerable to criticism that can be very harmful, that can be very nasty, that is really, really unfair and tough to tolerate. So I want to talk a little bit about what your approach is in your public spaces, and how do you try to both challenge traditional notions of thought while also trying to find a way to be in a safe space or a protected space?
Honestly, I'm not sure, but here are a few ways that I might approach answering that. So first of all, what does being an activist really mean? It means being a human who's committed to humanity, right? So all of us are activists. And so I kind of start with that premise that all of us are. How we activate ourselves and our communities and our relationships and our larger world looks differently for each of us. So that helps me to sort of situate things and say, that, and also one does not do that work of being someone who raises awareness or as an educator. And, being an educator has been so much more a part of my identity. And I think it was within that sort of umbrella of being an educator that activism is inevitable if you follow the kind of feminist praxis and feminist pedagogy like Bell Hooks advises us to teach to transform. And if you really take those kind of things to heart, as I always did while I was formerly in the classroom, then that there is work to be done between, sort of knowledge, acquisition, learning, thinking, being in the world, and acting in the world. That there's got to be this constant flow between all those things. And one of those life pieces of advice that I don't know if it made it into this book, but my father, you always used to say from when I was a very young person, my pa would say that, and he got this from his faith practice, from the Baha'i faith, that a person who had a lot of knowledge was more dangerous than a person who was of good character. But the two together would be light upon light. And so that's always kind of a guiding life principle that sort of informs me no matter what I do. And it also offers me boundaries, if you think about it, right? That who the heck am I to think I know something more than you do, Anjali? Like I may know something because I have a heck of a lot of academic privilege, okay? If you look around my house, the thing that I am really bountifully, materially blessed with is knowledge and books. Like they are flowing out of every corner of my living space and my life. And along with that comes a responsibility. But also one can't do that unless there is kind of an element of what am I doing with that? Like, what am I doing with it? So that's one way that I try to approach thinking about activism. And then the other part is that if we are going to then live into that, it is absolutely inevitable that we're going to piss people off. But we must speak anyway. We must speak anyway, especially if it is to amplify the oppressed, if it is to speak to the marginalization of someone, if it is to speak to harm, to oppression, especially if it is to speak to the systemic oppression rather than to individuals. And so I give myself some parameters within which I work, and I fully expect to be attacked and grapple with that on an ongoing basis. Is par for the course.
So I should say, I first had the pleasure of meeting Gayatri in person at a march in Atlanta. I forgot about that actually until just now. You were talking about activism. I was like, wait a minute, we actually met engaging in activism. So let me ask you this, because we have a lot of young people listening in, we have a lot of students. You are an educator, you have been engaging in talking back, as bell hooks would say, for most of your life. For people who are sort of new to activism, who are unsure about it, who might be afraid of using their voice, do you have any sort of advice for them?
I'm going to maybe read another excerpt if I can find it while we chat. The thing is that we live in a time where there's a lot of performative activism, and I kind of talk about that too, that not all activism is activism. Some of it is rooted in ego. Some of it actually is rooted in misinformation. If we believe the media, we would have us thinking that, everybody is problematic. There are no kind humans in the world, and that, anyone who is doing any kind of activism, just because it doesn't look the way it looks, like in public, that they're not doing anything at all. And those are all kind of really harmful narratives, right? So I read Moya Bailey's work a lot, and Moya Bailey put together, I think was a co-editor in a volume called #Activism. And I read that, and also read her more recent work, in which we realized that the algorithm does not love us, if we embody the way that we are, especially if you're a Black person who identifies as a woman. So hashtag activism. We need to talk about this. Who is talking about this? Farmers protest, Black Lives Matter, Syria, Palestine, Afghanistan, Haiti. I mean, let's just keep going. So you could fill those in. The fascism and violence escalate. Our outrage bleeds from our minds to our fingertips to Twitter and beyond. We must speak up. We must speak out. But did we pause? Did we process? Did we take time to learn? Not all of our words add to light or freedom. Some of what we say and do stems from shame and pressure. When we bleed our outrage all over each other, we often do more harm. So that's a piece that I would like to offer in response to your inquiry. To really, an invitation in the book for us to really think about, especially for young people. I find that young people are really under a lot of pressure to perform a certain kind of wokeness. And really, I think one ought to create space to be mindful, to be thoughtful, to be reflective, and to really be intentional when you do say or speak something. I find that there's a lot of bandwagoning, and often that then derails the actual intent of the cause. Sometimes there's a woke washing of things that really have a lot of liberatory potential, and then capitalism co-opts that, and then we help with that. So I think that, if there's one thing I would offer, it's to pause, process, take time to learn.
I love that so much. And I'm so guilty of doing all of those things you said. So I loved that passage because it really reminded me, like, my instinct is to just shoot off on Twitter. And I really loved that section of the book because I was like, I've got to bring it in first, got to take time to reflect and pause, just as you write about, instead of sort of have that instinct. And you're right. I mean, because, this may be, and actually maybe this is going into another question, but perhaps this is one of the big cons of social media. I mean, I feel like because of social media, I am able to engage with all these incredible human beings who I end up developing very real relationships with, very long-term relationships with. But I love that in the book you point out the fact that, a lot of times the social media is really just sort of burying us in rhetoric and propaganda and not giving us the space to actually comprehend what the issue is at hand. So I really appreciated that part in the book, and of all the reasons to read the book, that is certainly one of them. If you are interested in activism, if you are a student of activism, if you are an older activist like me, who is still learning, who is still, I feel like I'm still at the beginning of my journey, and the book is helping me as someone who's been around, right? So I really, really appreciate that aspect of the book, and sort of really how you sort of demystify and put into words that are a little bit more easier to grasp what performative activism is, and how it can be very, very harmful to especially marginalized communities. So I wanted to just shift gears a little bit, because I feel like, you do a lot of revolutionary work, right? Aside from your teaching and your mentoring and then your writing, one of one of the things about you that really blows me away and that I've learned so much from is your presence on Bookstagram as at Desi Book Aunty. I feel like the doors have been opened to this world to me. So I want to talk about how you approach being on Instagram, posting about books that are important to you, especially given your background as a scholar. How do you go about the process of educating the rest of us about works of art that we should really take a look at and use to sort of supplement our own educations as people?
Yeah, I'm still learning. I'm still learning. And I have, had some missteps in the curation process, but really I try to approach it the way the book advises us to do, is to really look for the margins within the margins, right? So let's say that Brown, Indigenous, and Black authors occupy a minuscule kind of part of our bookshelves, right? So I set the intention a few years ago to go ahead and decolonize my bookshelf, and to take my academic books, and there's probably either been donated, recycled, or sitting in boxes in my garage. And I a few years ago started the process of rebuilding my personal library from scratch with some sort of intentions. And I started to curate the kinds of readings that I would have taught in a global children's literature course, for example, or an introductory global studies course. And, I was assigning poetry even in courses like that. There were social sciences, because I really do love interdisciplinary work. I feel like, reading comic books and graphic novels, even when we're in kind of an advanced seminar about a particular topic, is so valuable. And so for a while, it was that the sensibility I brought to designing a syllabus is how I curated books to share on Bookstagram. So that's part of the process. The other is really, to humanize the process. I don't review books. Book reviewing tends to be kind of a whole different thing, and I'm not skilled at that. There are many folks I admire deeply who are skilled at that, and they bring kind of a certain sensibility. I make recommendations that come from my situatedness and my biases, and I'm very open about what my biases are. There's no such thing as an unbiased review. Reviewers will tell you otherwise, but we all bring our own situated lens to a particular thing. You could read, like somebody in our Zoom room could read one of your essays and see completely something different than I saw. Right? I would see genius and brilliance. I would see kind of the depth of research that's in there, the way that you made it accessible. And somebody would look at that and be like, that's some trash, right? And people are harsh like that. But I don't bring that to Bookstagram, because if there's a book that I have, I value and respect people's creativity a lot. Having tried to publish a book of my own, I have deep respect for what it takes, not just to write and create in whatever your chosen form is, but also to put it out into the world. It requires a level of persistence, determination, and resilience. And so I try to seek out those kinds of original pieces that, children's literature that might feature the Rohingya displaced populations. Like, I've never seen that. When I see that book in the form of Samira Surf's, I'm all about it. I'm telling you all why it is that I love this book. Get your hands on it. Brown people camping, that's a thing. So let's just go ahead and bring this content to all brown children who are scared to go camping, and for good reasons. So those are the kinds of books I'm attracted to, by the folks that are marginalized, the stories that haven't been told yet, innovative work, work that requires bravery. And so those are the kinds of books I share about, and I try to be really upfront about why I like the work. And I don't pretend to be unbiased.
I love it.
A lot of times I'm in relationship with those writers,
mm-hmm.
And sometimes I might have even read how it evolved over the course of 6 months. So, but I think you should read it, and I hope you'll trust I hope I've done the work on Bookstagram to earn your trust when I make a recommendation.
And just to put in a plug again, your handle is at Desi Book Aunty. For anybody who's on Instagram, please check it out. But I'm going to ask a few more questions, but I wanted to invite people in the audience while I'm getting to these next questions to please drop your own question in the Q&A box. We want to know what you want to talk about and what questions you have about the book, about activism, writing, social media. So please go ahead and put your questions in now, and we'll be getting to them in the next few minutes. So my follow-up, Gayatri, to your curation work on Instagram is, I'm wondering, do you think that that the kind of work that you do, the kind of work that Indigenous, Black, and other brown bookstagrammers do, are putting a dent maybe in the kind of big press white publishing world and the gatekeeping that is very difficult to sort of push through, especially when you are a marginalized author, especially when you are, as you and I are, small press authors, and even older authors. It's very hard for the over 40 folks to sort of, who are starting out in book publishing to be seen in this industry.
Yeah.
Do you see that the work you do and these other amazing bookstagrammers do you see this is sort of our way of getting our leg up into this business that is really, really hard for us to enter?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, because I'm still at it and I haven't given up, even though there have been plenty of opportunities for me to be like, this is just too much, because it is a lot of invisible intellectual, mental, and emotional labor on behalf of people who don't always appreciate it. So that's one thing, right? Like there may be authors like you who really genuinely see the value in this work and how much, space I might give you on my Bookstagram to promote your books at every opportunity, whichever event. Like I'm really thoughtful, like, okay, so we had a partition anniversary. Not only am I going to share Dr. Manisha Bajaj's resources for Edutopia, but I'm also going to bring you your novel, like is timely, right? So I try to be really intentional in when I read, sort of re-recommend certain things. But, I must say that it's a thankless job. It is, because the majority of folks don't value it. And so I think there is a level of discouragement that would seep in, but I still believe in it. I believe that there are ways to reclaim these spaces because, as I said before, I mean, the algorithm doesn't love me, especially when I post about Palestine or, what have you. So how do I reclaim the space? How do I intentionally put certain content forward with a caption that might make you stop and think that, not every book about Afghanistan is going to perpetrate the right kind of messaging around that, right? Like, how am I going to do that? Requires a lot of effort on my part. It's not something I just wake up and do, like I put a lot of effort into thinking about what I'll post, how and when and why. Now, a lot of bookstagrammers, especially the younger generation, share things that they would read anyway. Many of them, it's now like there is this thing where publishing, so white has realized that this is a thing. And so they put certain books, the ones who have a really large publicity budget, like you and I never had. I don't have a publicist and there is no budget, it's just me. So, for those of us who don't have that, there is this other world in which there are publicists who will send you free copies and say, post on such and such date with this caption. I tried it one time and I said, never again, because I really want to be authentic in what I share. If I didn't spend my own money or my time going to the library to borrow the book to tell you about it, I'm not going to tell you. Right? So, but again, I'm different. A lot of Bookstagram has now been co-opted. And so that is paid content. And it's not always clear that it's paid content because not everybody who's getting a free book is telling you where they got it. And that's not okay with me. So there's work to be done there, for there to be more transparency, more accountability, and for there to be a way to recognize the unpaid expertise and labor of folks who really do know what they're doing and do it with a lot of effort. I have yet to see that, but I continue and I persist with the hope that that will happen.
All right, well, that answer is like the perfect segue for us to go to my next question, which I think is super important for you to address, especially given what all we've talked about in the last 50 minutes. You do a lot of unpaid labor, and it's very emotional labor. It's very taxing labor. Of course, it also comes with rewards. But we are all human beings with a definite number of spoons, and often cannot exceed those. So given the kind of very intense work that you do, much of which is not paid, how do you find balance? What does self-care mean to you in this kind of work? And you know, do you find ways to pull back, to take breaks? How does this work look like on your end, in addition to the care that you obviously need to give yourself?
Yeah, can we find an answer and bottle it? Because I'm searching. I'm searching for how to do that. I'll tell you what though, I have an abundant resource and it flows through me. And that is radical love. That is an abundant resource I have. And even on my darkest, most burnt out, completely depleted days, I have it. I'm blessed with it. Partly because there are people in this Zoom room that continue to fill it. Whether it be by amplifying my work, whether it be by saying that they enjoyed reading it, whether it be by taking the time to read a book. I mean, that is an act of love, to take time in your very full life to read this book or to share about it. Whether it be people who send me flowers to congratulate me on this debut launch. And you know who you are in the Zoom room, who continue to pour your love into me so that the well of love within me can flow. And that's what I try to do, right? I don't think of self-care as being something that's individualistic. I think that a lot of folks like Mia Birdsong, a lot of folks like Adrienne Marie Brown, a lot of folks have taught us that, especially for those of us who are about Black and Brown and Indigenous liberation, whatever that means for us, really ought to rethink the self-other binary that's taught to us by colonizers. There is no self-care without community care. There is no community care without self-care. The two function in togetherness. In addition to that, people who are embodied like you and I, systemically, have so many pressures on us that we get depleted. And it is not our lack of self-care that is to blame for the migraine that we have in coping with the grief of a loss that's unspeakable and unjust, for example. So all I can say is we must cultivate the kind of radical love that Black feminists, intersectional feminists teach us, that maybe our spiritual practices teach us. And so I think I continue to pour into my circles and relationships in kind of a selfless way. I set boundaries because, as you said, there are limited spoons. I try not to make myself a bit available to other people's consumption and extraction because that's a matter of principle. But there are days when I am tired. The BBs, aunties, didis of the world are freaking tired, especially in a pandemic that has gone on way too long. We are tired of taking care of everybody with so few people reciprocating. And we are still radically present because we show up. You showed up for me today, Anjali. Dr. Monisha Bajaj showed up to this space for me today. Dr. Neela Bhattacharya showed up to this space for us today. You know, every last person who showed up to this space today is nourishing my ability to continue and persist. So thank you, Anjali, for doing that for me.
Well, like I said, this has been such a privilege and honor for me. So before I ask my next question, I just want to remind everybody, we do have one question right now in the Q&A. I'm going to ask one more question and then I will get to Caleb's, but please, y'all, please take your opportunity to get to ask Dr. Sethi about everything she knows. She knows a lot. So please drop a question in the Q&A. So my last question for you is, it is a tough time to be an author right now. It's a tough time to market and sell books. Obviously, we are living in, there's a lot of tragedy around us. There is a pandemic, but we still need to keep turning to books to educate ourselves, to lift one another up. So what can we, the reader, do to uplift and support you right now as an author to help get the word out about Unbelonging?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question, because I have been struggling with just that. Those who have tried to publish a book will appreciate all of the things behind the scenes that it requires to make such a thing happen. Your books did not come with ease. They took a persistence over decades. Same with mine. I've firmly been working on it for about 4 years, but it's been in the works for about maybe 10 or 12. And so it requires a lot of persistence. And I really would wish for the readers to offer grace to our books, to read them with open minds and hearts, to be cautious in how they approach our books in particular, because the negative reviews of Black and Brown folks' books are far more damaging in impact than you can ever imagine. So I would offer a cautionary note. I would invite folks to have grace and empathy for the authors. I would invite us to read the book. Please try to access the book. Request it at your library when that becomes possible. And for my book, that is yet to happen. Support independent bookstores like Firestorm Co-op, who are making it happen despite all of the hurdles to stock this book on their shelves. Share your copy with your community. And I think, since we did talk about social media, I think it does matter if we post about the book and share with our community in an authentic way. Like, I'm not going to ask you what to say, but whatever seems meaningful to you, keeping in mind the cautionary notes I offered, is a meaningful way of uplifting things that most people won't even know that this book exists, because they're not going to be able to browse on Amazon and find it there, because it's not going to be there anytime soon. They won't know about this book unless someone tells them about it. So that's a really great way to support it. And another 2-minute thing would be to add it on Goodreads. Those things, those little gestures of kind of sharing really do, in whatever format feels meaningful. And then for the academics in this chat, many of my supportive colleagues like Dr. Cynthia Lubin are here and have come to multiple events, and I cannot thank you enough for that investment of time in me. May I be worthy. May this book be on your syllabi. I think it lends itself really well to that. And I did create it as an offering to my community of teachers, scholars, friends, students, and co-learners. And so I hope that you'll receive it as an offering.
And if I may piggyback on ways to support you, it's so wonderful when you are an author and a reader sends you just a personal note, praising and glorifying your work. So I would encourage for people who write these personal notes to Gayatri to consider sharing that on social media if you feel comfortable. If you praise an author personally, of course it is wonderful and we cherish it. But if you praise them publicly, it encourages other people to find your book. And so if you have something wonderful to say about this book, and trust me, you will, please if you are active on social media and if you feel comfortable, please post it. You don't even have to be on social media. Text it to a few friends, call up a few people. It's word of mouth really does move books, and we want to support this important book and this important person. And so please consider doing that. I would like to turn to some of our questions since we are at the top of the hour. Yes. So Caleb, thank you for this question. Caleb is interested in the part of our discussion that was about the very colonial education that we get. So Caleb is saying he never thought deeply about it. Do you have any other examples that you can give him of what a colonial education is and what it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll offer a few inquiries to think about, like who designed the textbooks that you grew up learning from? What was the dominant voice from which the information was provided to you? What was the dominant narrative or mindset? What did your teachers look like? Whose identities did they mirror? What were conversations about you and your identities that you'd never received in the classroom? What percentage of the work that you ever read growing up in high school or even in college is by folks who are interrogating the dominant narratives about this world? When we start to ask questions like that, we start to unpack how deeply that colonial mindset is seeped through schooling. Also, we would read someone like Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire is the person that I read and I said, oh, my mind has been bleepity bleep bleep bleeped. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, talks about that. There are many African scholars who we never would have heard about unless we took, an advanced course in graduate school, who, including the names I just gave you, and some of them I cite in this book. And so there are a lot of clues in here about follow-up work that you can do. That there are clues in here about what you can read and what that might mean. And finally, I say to you, the very institution of schooling is a colonial construct. And now I'm going to let you sit with that and figure that out for yourself.
And here's just an example. I mean, there are writing exercises in here, and most of these questions actually do go towards the work of decolonization. And so that's one thing you can do with this book, is actually understand more sort of the miseducation that, many of us have received in our lives, and to really challenge, interrogate what it was that we're coming with and how we need to go about deconstructing it. So exercises in here are super helpful. So I want to go to the next question, and this is from, and I apologize in advance if I'm mispronouncing your name, Aaliyah. She or he or they asks, what tips do you have for young writers?
What a beautiful question. What tips do I have for young? The first tip is to write and to give yourself the freedom to write. Most young writers often, again, this is an example of what Caleb asked, is come with a lot of mental commentary and self-edit in the writing process because of things they were told they're supposed to do or not do. So when I work with young writers, I tell them to give themselves permission to write, and write how you wish to write in the ways that make sense to you. If it means that you write 2 tweets a day, that's writing. To not be judgmental or self-critical about what that writing looks like, because writing in and of itself needs to happen. So my number one tip is to give yourself permission to write, give yourself freedom to write, and also show up to writing, and the rest will happen and unfold. Show up to it.
All right, that is a great question. Thank you so much, Aaliyah, for asking it. I'm going to move to the next question. which is from Monisha. Monisha says, first of all, she starts out with a compliment, and I'm sure you've heard this many times. She says, one of the things I admire about you, Dr. Sethi, is how you mother and nurture so many communities beyond your own children. And so they're wondering, this is a great, great question. They're wondering if your children have read the book and what their reactions have been. And Monisha would like to know if you could share what some of their reactions have been.
To some extent. And let me begin by saying thank you, Monisha, for being a comrade, a friend, beloved, a kin who's shown up for me repeatedly for many decades. I met Monisha when she was an undergraduate and I was a graduate student. So we have walked through many things in life together. And for her to continue to show up to me is nothing short of grace. And I appreciate you truly, Monisha. So this question about children and communities, you know, I wrote it for them in mind. The dedication of the book is for the ones who call me Mama, Auntie, and Bibi, right? It's dedicated for them. It was crafted as a tool, an offering, but also as some kind of legacy, right? So the thing that I keep having to do in a book like this is that I had to go back and find out things about my family and our extended family that I did not have access to because of how multiply immigrant we were, and because I didn't have access to those languages or lands. And I talk about how that can really influence you as a young person in feeling like you don't ever belong or fit anywhere. And that was, you know, for much of my young life, that was kind of a dilemma, right? And so I went back and I put things together in one place in the form of this book so that hopefully my children, whenever they come to it, will be able to find answers to questions about their heritage, their culture, their identities that I did not have access to. So I've created it not necessarily thinking that they would read it now, because in some ways, especially our younger child has not read it yet. And so, but has read excerpts and, you know, so fully supportive of this endeavor of sharing our work, our book. And so if we do talk about it, it's our book. You know, the whole family created it together. And so we take pride in that, and we kind of understand that we will read it if and when we are ready. But the conversations that are listed in here are conversations that happen at our breakfast and dinner table regularly. So they are very familiar with some of this content, and they call it Mama's Rants. This is a book full of Mama's rants. So that's what they say.
That is hysterical. We have another question. And again, before I ask this question that belongs to Caitlin, want to invite anyone in the Q&A space to drop a question or drop a comment about the book, or its teachings. So let me go to Caitlin's question.
Can I interrupt you a minute? I wanted to invite Dr. Dotson in particular to offer a question or comment before we wrap up.
Sounds great. I will look for that question in the Q&A box. So Caitlin wants to know another great question. They're considering writing stories as a side job / hobby, and would like to know how much research did you do to put together this book?
A lot of research. And I think that it may not be obvious to people, because one of the things that I did to decolonize the space of the book was to not make it hefty and sort of fact heavy, but to invite folks to, it's not the kind of book where I'm going to teach you a lot of content that's factual, but it's rather what is the heart space of someone who experiences unbelonging. I think it's more that it's both a heart space and a mind space, but there's more heart, I think, in it. And so there's no way that I could have written this if I had not read and researched. And part of my research actually involved revisiting some of the places that I talk about in the book. So from when I was 18 and came to college in the US until 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, when I was in the drafting process of Unbelonging, I had not been to India for a variety of reasons. And so I brought my children, my partner, and our family, and we spent 1 whole month in India. And that was part of the research. So when you say research, we can be expansive about what that means. Some of the research involved revisiting and relearning some of the words that I grew up in hearing in Kiswahili that I had forgotten because I haven't spoken Kiswahili since I was 10. And so there was a lot of research that went into this book, but what it looked like could be anything from an interview with a family member to actually traveling to these places, to relearning words and phrases in certain languages. So there was a lot that went into this book.
That's a great answer. And I love how you talk about lived experiences as part of the research, because I do think that that's kind of a forgotten part of research, right? I mean, we think of texts, we think of archives and documents and videos, but, just sort of being there and being aware of your surroundings. I mean, it is very much a part of research. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A right now, but I will. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, we do have one. Thank you. This is Dr. Dotson, I believe, right? Okay, so here's the question. Dr. Dotson first thanks you for the love and light, and says, students at Clayton State University will be interrogating their identities tomorrow in class. What suggestions do you have for them as they reflect on their multiple identities? Great question.
Yeah. So to reflect, right? So that means, do you look outside? Do you look at newspapers and a text to reflect? Where do you go when you reflect on your identities is kind of a question to think about. And I think, as per what I was saying earlier about hashtag activism, I think we forget that we ourselves are these miraculous beings. Each of us in our unique ways are geniuses and marvels of humanity. And what I would do if I were reflecting on my identities would be to look to myself the way I would look to a dreamed of imaginary place that I've never been to, that I've always dreamed of going. And bring that marvel, that curiosity, that admiration, that search for truth to studying myself, because I am worthy. I am worthy of that. And there is an academic way of thinking about it, and it's called autoethnography. But that's what it means to me. I've translated the notion of autoethnography into this book, which is very experimental, and attempted to do that. But that's how I approached it, is to go within, and with the lenses that I have offered you of curiosity and self-worthiness and positivity about it, rather than a critical lens, because we're not going to be able to answer our questions about our identity if we don't come from a place of self-curiosity and self-compassion and self-worth. We can't do it.
And that rings so incredibly true to me, especially since so many of our identities have been so marginalized and attacked, and they've been weaponized against us in this moment all over the world. So I really appreciate and need to hear over and over again, and of course we'll read this book over and over again, to take the time to reflect upon what it means to me, because it does feel as if right now establishing and feeling at home and comfortable with our own identities is hard to do when there's so much noise around us that makes us feel so vulnerable for asserting our identities.
And yet here we are. We exist. and I say this over and over again in the book. And we create families, we create relationships, we create friendships, we create books, we create stories. We are marvels, and here we are despite that. So I think we always need to situate our sense of self, knowing that so much of what's so troubling in the world and so unjust is systemic oppression and how we live it, whoever we are, but it is not a reflection of who we are. And so I do try in many different ways in this book to sort of seed those ideas of, through affirmations, through mantras, through, spiritual sort of like invocations, because I want us to remember that who we are in some ways is up to us, right? We do have agency and power, even though we live in systems determined to exterminate us.
And the book Unbelonging is such a great reminder for that too, that we do have that agency. Some days it might not feel like that, but we do.
We do.
We've got a couple more questions. I might ask them together because they're very similar thematically. So let me start with the first one. It reads, I am a member of the LGBTQI community, and I have a hard time feeling like I belong. Do you have any suggestions of books about belonging like yours for the LGBT students who don't feel like they belong? And I'm going to piggyback that with another question from Aaliyah, which is, I have a hard time finding a place in most social settings, or really for anywhere for that matter. I feel very different. Do you have any tips for students who also feel this way? So questions really about any sort of resources, especially for the LGBTQIA+ community, but also more generally, the other important question, which is, what can we do if we feel different? What can we do if we feel like we don't belong anywhere? How does one seek belonging?
Well, this is a spoiler. The book says, whether it is for our queerness, whether it is for how we are embodied, whether it is for our nationality, whether it is for our minoritized religious affiliation, whatever the reason, that, that even the desire to belong is a colonial construct. So in some ways, what I do is call a book called Unbelonging to invite us to say, what if we gave zero bleepity bleeps about belonging? What if? Really, I really do offer that as an invitation to say, what if? How much of our individual human suffering would we do away with if we just didn't give a hoot about whether we fit in and whether people accept us for our queerness or not? What if we accepted ourselves, reclaimed ourselves, remembered that we have agency, and also remember for clues all around us, because unfortunately we forget this when we are suffering and so personally individualized in our suffering, that there are others just like us with whom we have work to do to build community. Because I find that so many times when I am in despair, because I just don't fit or belong, or the people that I cared about so selflessly do not reciprocate this care, I remind myself that I am worthy, that I exist, that I will continue to be the person I am, and I have a responsibility and work to curate those relationships. And that I begin the book by saying that the place where we wish to belong does not exist, quote James Baldwin. And I rephrase James Baldwin's saying to sort of signal that, to say, really, that place does not exist for any of us, especially those of us who are marginalized for being LGBTQ, for those of us who are marginalized for being Black, Indigenous, for those of us who are marginalized for identities that are currently, as you said, kind of under duress. That said, Firestorm Co-op is an interesting space for many, many reasons. One reason is it's an anarchist, queer, uplifting co-op bookstore that has an abundance of books and book recommendations. If you contact the amazing comrades and booksellers who I love dearly with all my heart, they will recommend you books that will be just right for you. And I mean that. I'm not just giving this as a line because I'm supposed to. I truly, earnestly believe that you are in the exact right space to get answers to a sense of belonging. And Firestorm Co-op is a place where you might find like-hearted, like-minded, queer reading folks. And I invite you to go ahead and start attending more of their events. Pay attention to which events they are hosting, which authors' books they are promoting, and you will see what I mean. They are amazing.
I love that. And yes, we are in the perfect space for that affirmation of all the places.
Of all the places you walked into, because your teacher told you to, maybe.
And I would love to put a plug in for a friend of
Yes.
ours. I am reading
Yes.
his book, Rajiv Mohabir's Anti-Man, and it is a queer Indo-Caribbean Floridian memoir, and it's fantastic. And so I highly recommend that book. I've been carrying it around with me all day today, but for some reason I forgot to bring it here.
It's so funny that you added that, because it was almost like my brain waves went to yours, because I got this like whole follow Firestorm thing, but I was like, Rajiv's book, where is it? Would it be all okay if I got up and ran to my shelf? But yes, look up Anti-Man by Rajiv Mohabir.
I have really had it with me all day, so now I of course I come to the Zoom room and it's not here. So I'm going to double check with questions. So I'm going to ask a question as we're sort of running a little bit low on time. So in this moment, Gayatri, what does it mean to you to be a creator of things? A creator of curated lists of books, a creator of this incredible book of yours, a creator meaning an educator, the kind of work you do. And so what does it mean to you to be a creator, and how does creation sustain you?
You know, creation to me is it Toni Morrison who told us that we have to create exactly when we feel that the world is telling us not to? Wasn't that Toni Morrison? I think so. I often think of creating and writing poetry, essays, whatever the format, creating pieces of art, paintings, as an act of audacious hope. And so, you know, there is a verse in here towards the end of the book that I may, if I can find it, read to you, that is a nod to hopeful audacity. That, you know, some days showing up to write, Anjali, is an act of hopeful audacity. And it is in the times when we feel that we least have the bandwidth and emotional resilience and anything to say, when we ought to probably engage that space, right? Like that is what it means to me, is it, you know, this is an act of audacity. It's absolutely that. And I hope that people will perceive that when they hold it in their hands, that, you know, what it took to say the things I say and write them the way I wrote them in these times. My publisher has been experiencing a great deal of challenges. They're a small press. The economy is hard. Paper supplies globally are non-existent. They have been doing their earnest to get it out, and they wanted to postpone it. And out of a sense of responsibility to the folks who've been eagerly anticipating it since, you know, all year, basically, I would not let them. And partly was because I have a deep sense of faith that those who read this book will receive something that's needed in these times. And that's a hope, right? So it's kind of a hope. So writing anything at all is hopeful. And we all need hope. Trust.
We sure do. I am going to start wrapping this up. We are running low on time, and I believe we've gotten to everybody's questions. So in summary, please go get your copy of Belonging. And please shout out your praises to the world. You can do this certainly on social media. You can call up your friends. But also please check out the work that Gayatri does at Desi Book Aunty on Instagram. It is, as she mentioned, a syllabus for life. The books she picks are fantastic. I will say that I oftentimes have never heard of these books, and I really appreciate that as a reader, finding places where, the same book is mentioned in 10 different newspapers or 15 different magazines. And then I come to Gayatri's page and it's just like an awakening of all the other fantastic works of literature out there. So please check out her Instagram. Go to Goodreads and leave a review. And again, make your praise public. If you have limited means and cannot purchase this book through Firestorm, absolutely request it from your library. That is an incredibly major way to help authors, is to get this book in libraries. Librarians really need to read it. It is a great tool for educators as well. So please talk to people teachers at the elementary school level, to the college level, and just let them know that it's there as a great resource for them, and possibly, if appropriate, for their students. I want to take this time to say how incredibly grateful I am to be in this space, to be in this conversation with you, Gayatri. I've learned so much. I feel like I'm a better person because of our friendship. I want to also say that Firestorm Books is doing some incredible work. And, the beauty of sort of being online and having access to the internet is that we have a great choice of the bookstores that we can support, because we can order directly from bookstores that we could not necessarily drive to pick up books at. So please consider ordering Gayatri's book from Firestorm Books, but really check out all the great books that they have. Such an important bookstore, and we all not only want, but we need them to be around for a very, very long time.
I think you covered all the gratitude. I just want to thank Esme in particular, because Esme is a dear piece of my heart, and just someone just so dear to me, as are you, Anjali. So really it made so much sense for us to do this together. And I really especially want to thank every one of you who made time today to share this space with us. And because I was unable to see who you were, if you would let me know that you were here, that would mean so much to me, so I can thank you personally for your time. And thank you, Anjali, again.
I'm gonna hop onto the gratitude train here. Thank you both so much for allowing us to sit in on that conversation, which was wonderful. And thanks to the attendees for asking phenomenal questions and vulnerable questions. Like, I just want to honor that, like, that's a big deal, and that brought a lot to this space as well. It's one thing to hear two really smart, phenomenal people talk about something, but for it to really feel like a group conversation, even though we weren't all here together in person, to make it feel like we were all here together, which was really special, and we don't always get with the events. Thank you for shouting out our little queer bookstore run by just a group of queer weirdos who
love y'all.
Feel unbelonging together. And yeah, so much gratitude for that. Reminder that we did drop a lot of links in the chat during the conversation if you wanted to just skim through them real quick before we end the event. Links to purchase the book Unbelonging, to view the other event that we did with both Anjali and Gayatri. I threw in a list of queer, feel-good queer books, if that's something that you need right now, and a couple of other books that Gayatri and Anjali shouted out during the conversation. But thank y'all so much again. This was so great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate y'all.